welcome. Just give a few seconds. Sure, we are live. We're live already on YouTube. All right, wonderful. Hello and welcome to Expose podcast. How are you guys doing? Today, I have a very special guest, Philippa Bagley. Philippa is a dedicated psychotherapist with 40 years of life experience. Inspired by her military background and the mental health challenges faced by veterans, she is committed to helping individuals from around the world overcome obstacles, challenges, and achieve their full potential. Her amazing work offers actionable, impactful guidance to diverse audience. She's working with people who struggle with sexual abuse, PTSD, domestic violence, anxiety, phobias, and suicide. Thank you, Philippe, for joining Expose Podcast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here on your show with all the things that you're doing as well.
And you yourself have as well a podcast, which we will talk at the end. So it's amazing when you're on the other side. Actually, how is it for you when you're the guest?
Oh, it's so much easier, I think, because I don't have to think about all the questions and I can just come and talk about me and my stuff. So I'm really looking forward to this as a slightly less pressure from the interviewing point of view. So thank you again.
Mm. Could you share with my pleasure? I'm curious about what put you on this path. Could you share with us a little
Yeah,
story?
absolutely. Great question. It's never a direct thing. So I spent 15 years with the British Army, in various guises. I served in Afghanistan, and I then left and went to work in corporate, like many people did. And over the last sort of five last 5 years, I kind of felt I wasn't being fulfilled by the corporate life. Now, you can't recreate the military in the corporate world, and I wouldn't recommend doing it anyway. But what I saw as I was leaving and as I saw other people who had left was there's a lot of people, a lot of veterans with health problems, like mental health problems. Um, and actually in the corporate world, there's a lot of people with mental health problems. And the more I looked, the more I went, I feel that sitting behind a desk isn't fulfilling me. And I need to find a way of service. But in all honesty, therapy wouldn't have been my first thought because I didn't really know much about it. I thought a lot of the stuff out there was made up or, gurus taking advantage of vulnerable people. But my husband actually went through some mental health challenges. And through the work we did with him, it made me come to realize how powerful therapeutic modalities, like any kind of therapy, can be. And I really found a passion for it myself. And I then started retraining, going on every course I could find, every qualification I could find, practice, 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 apply, apply, apply. And here I am now. And it's such a privilege to be doing this work because it's such a now I understand it. Now I no longer think it's made up. Um, this it's amazing what we can do, and I really want people to know that they don't have to be stuck where they are. There are ways that things can be unstuck. So that's kind of it.
Wow, it's amazing how while you are trying to help your husband, you somehow open the path of healing for yourself. Like sometimes, especially, we're trying to fix the world and then you're like, oh wow, what's there, for me too. Um, and then you took all those courses and trainings and realizing, okay, I'm done with the corporative. Uh, and in having this insight, I want to do something else, which many people have those insights, even now watching, feeling like, okay, I'm burnout, I'm tired, but not everybody has the bravery and courage. So I want to acknowledge, starting a new career. That's a huge thing. And but I would like to ask some part of which maybe help you, but I'm not sure if that help you to change your career, which is resilience. Could you share with us what's resilience, and anything would you like to share to that
Mm.
point of being
Yeah,
resilient?
absolutely. Resilience is one of my favorite topics.
Mm,
It is something we all have in different levels. For me, well, so if we take it to like a theoretical level, it is simply the ability to recover from something, and it's how fast we can do it. And it kind of lends itself to how fast we can adapt to change or how fast we can adapt to adversity. What that means, though, in like a real person scenario is if something goes wrong, what do you do? And to your point about, changing careers being brave, um, thank you. And for me, I've never been wedded to one path. I have just said yes to things and I've just gone with it. And the reason I joined the army was because actually, this is a very long story I'll tell short. I lived in Russia, part of my degree at Durham, and while I was living in St. Petersburg, I got hit by a car. And I obviously didn't die because here I am now, but I was quite seriously injured. I had to relearn how to walk. I had amnesia. And of course, I woke up in a foreign country and all I knew that I was in Russia. That's all I remembered at the time. It all came back later on. So when I came back to the UK, at my final year of university, some of my friends were doing the army reserves and officer training. They kind of went, "Well, you were really active. You like stuff. This is a way of testing your body." So I literally signed up to the army to test my body to see if I was healed from this car accident. And then I stayed basically because I had a really good time. But that again is resilience. And I always say that I was a very, very shy child. We moved around a lot. I never fit in. I, struggled to make friends for a while. And that gives you a certain amount of resilience, moving from place to place, having to start again, having to find a way of getting on with people. And that for me laid the foundations of where I am now. Because if you said to me 30 odd years ago that I'd have to talk to people, stand up in big rooms, do that kind of thing, I would have gone, no way. Absolutely no. There's no way I could do it. But now I know that my level of resilience is so high that it's just another thing and other people can do it and so I can do it. And that is it. And resilience is a journey. It is every time you get a little bit uncomfortable, you push yourself a little further and you grow a bit more. And then the next time something comes along, maybe it's less stressful, or maybe you solve it quicker. And essentially, the more you put yourself outside of your comfort zone, the more you'll grow, the more resilience you'll get. With the way the world is now, currently, I think there's a lot of people living in fear. And part of that is because media, news, social media, it's telling us all the bad things are happening. Part of that, though, is our levels of resilience to deal with these things or our confidence in ourselves. And I am a firm believer that everyone is way more resilient than they believe they are. But to put yourself into that position willingly, it does take a certain something. And so a lot of people find that they're resilient because they have to be. Something terrible happens, they have no choice but to move forward with it. For some people, like myself, but not always because I'm human, I have chosen to put myself in an uncomfortable situation. And for me now, to not do that is not being true to myself. If the moment I start getting bored and complacent, I know I've got to push myself again. That's just me. I'm not saying everyone has to be that way because sometimes it's not the healthiest attitude. But by doing this, I know that no matter how hard it gets so far, and I've been to war, I have run marathons, I have changed careers again and again and again, I know that I will get through it. And I know that because I know me. And I know that all I have to do is sometimes break things down one step at a time, move forward one step at a time. And I have confidence in my resilience. But anybody can do that. And the more you do, the more resilience you have, and basically the less stress you'll have in your life.
But that's powerful, and I just acknowledge your hope. Like, is it? I'm actually curious. would you like to say, what advice would you give to someone who's right now watching and they they thinking about some change, like
Mm-hmm.
career, relationship, you name it. But then there is this feeling of, what if that's not going to work again? What if I just end up where I am right now? Like there is no kind of hope or feeling like, oh, I'm just, like that heaviness when you go through so many disappointments and you're like, been there. What would you say to them? Is there any exercise, any activity, or just what comes out for you?
There, yeah, great question. So there are different methodologies and different psychological theories and neuroscience theories. There's a couple of things that everyone needs to know, I think, but you won't understand it until you've gone through the process. But one is pain is temporary. But when you're living in pain, it doesn't feel like it's temporary. It feels like it's permeating everything. And seeing a light at the end of that tunnel is really, really difficult to find. Now, there are some, um, again, really well-known solutions to try and move from this. Essentially, what we want to do is shift the negative thought patterns into positive thought pattern. And from a neuroscience point of view, what you have to realize with when you're in that negative state, the brain thinks that's the pattern you should be in. And so you have a part of the brain called the amygdala, that is the fight or the flight part of the brain. It also can cause people to freeze, and fawn is the other ones people might have heard of. But it gets its messaging from a part of the brain called the hippocampus. That is essentially the template for how we behave. Now, any kind of stimulus that you get to your brain, so like even like seeing a spider, for example, you see a spider. Now, if you're someone who is a bit funny about spiders, straight away you're going to jump. That is your amygdala, that is your fear or your fight thing reacting. But if you haven't got a really strong phobia, about 60 seconds later, your brain will go, it is just a spider. It's okay. You're safe. Don't worry about it. And you'll kind of calm down. However, when you get stuck in that negative loop, what we call the intelligent brain, that message doesn't come through. So what starts to happen is every stimulus you get, you respond in a fight or flight mode. And in some cases, that's just been negative. That's the depression, the anxiety, the overwhelm. That is you being stuck in the amygdala and it's no longer serving you. But the great thing, neuroplasticity, it's about how your brain can be rewritten. So we used to think that our ways of thinking were fixed. We'd say, as a child, you're a bit of a sponge, and then you get to adulthood and you can't change anything anymore. The great thing is you can totally change the way your brain thinks. It's a muscle like anyone else. We can create new neural pathways. And that really is how you shift from this feeling of like, what's the point, the overwhelm, the depression. And some really common ways of doing that. Mindfulness. Now, I used to think that mindfulness was a made up woo thing. I hold my hands up to that. Then I studied the science behind it, the neuroscience of the brain. And looking at how mindfulness affects the brain, it reduces that stress area substantially. And the more you do it, the less the greater impact effect it has. And so, and when I say mindfulness, often I think on you have the Instagram version of mindfulness. It's like go and sniff a flower and go outside. And these things are really important to do because they are good for us, but they're not the ones that are going to shift you. The things that are going to shift you is first of all sitting in yourself and acknowledging the badness, first of all. Because sometimes we lie to ourselves, we're the best at lying to ourselves. So you need to sit in yourself for a moment and go, okay, I'm feeling this way. Then you need to let it go, essentially go, that's okay, but I don't need to dwell on this fact. And there's a number of exercises you can do. You can start with a body scan where you're just focusing on your body from head to toe, taking deep breaths and thinking about how's my head feeling? How's my shoulders? How's my stomach? All the way down, focusing on your breathing. But what this is doing is just bringing you into the present, into the now. And one of the things around anxiety and um, depression is they're focusing on the future, on the so what, or on the past. But those two things, the past is done, the future is unknown. All you have is now. So that exercise brings you back into the now, into the way are you now. The other thing I think is a great activity is there's a thing called a positive events calendar. And again, if you're someone who's stuck in a really negative place, and this is really hard to do at first, but like I think with training the brain, go out and write down the smallest things that gave you a moment of joy or happiness or mild amusement. It could have been just hearing the birds sing, the fact that you love the smell of coffee. And what you're slowly doing with both these practices is you are just training your brain to move out of the emotional side, out of the amygdala and the fear and the flight, and back into the intelligent side. And as the more you do it, the easier it gets. And of course, the easier it gets, the less you do the negative. And actually, a good sort of 6 to 8 weeks of doing this, which seems like a long time, but like that can really be enough to completely rewire your brain. And obviously, I've glossed over a lot of the steps, but essentially, being continuous, that's enough to completely rewire your brain in many cases. And the other thing, of course, is just talking to people around you and finding good people around you to talk to. We've all got the friends who see the negative in everything, and that's cool. That's their model of the world, but that doesn't serve you if all you get is negativity. And you have to learn to be precious with your energy and your time and understand what's going into your brain. So I very rarely watch the news these days. I used to be an emphatic news watcher. I very rarely watch the news. I use social media for marketing and for the odd like messenger thing. I very rarely spend time on it. And this is how I safeguard my well-being. But I also go outside. I also go for walks. I have a dog. Animals really help. I talk to my husband when most of the time anyway. So, all these things happen or what you do to kind of get yourself out. But it is see it as a muscle that you have to train, just like you have to train your arms and your legs and your stomach, you have to train your brain. And by doing that, you can slowly shift yourself out of that place.
Oh, thank you for sharing all that, knowledge around amygdala and how being in that fight and flight mode, eh, manifests in those thoughts of, am I going to survive? And the fear-based, worry-based, and how by repetitive, you mentioned 6 weeks of practicing something like body scan or like that exercise. I have a positive calendar, like just writing down, even though first will might feel like this is stupid. Why am I doing this? But then you start to notice, okay, I don't have anymore this thought, the neuroplasticity and how our brain can change at any age, even at 80 or 90. That's kind of like, wow. So bringing hope for many people who experience, not just trauma, but who just want to have more joy and happiness and good relationships. Could we talk a little about emotional regulation, what it is? Because it's a term which, not many people even know what it is. So would you like to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So emotional regulation, there's a theory called emotional regulation theory. And basically that says that people may struggle because to manage their emotions because basically they haven't in the past confronted their emotions, so they've avoided it, they've suppressed it, rather than accepting or reprisal. And so how this words, how this manifests itself. Um, you have people. We often say that hurt people hurt other people, right? And and part of that can be because of their emotional regulation. So they have suffered, terrible, terrible things, and it doesn't have to be almost when we take a step back and talk about trauma. One person's trauma can't be compared to another person's trauma, and I know you know this because it's how it affects that individual. So a trauma for one person could be my dad didn't come to one of my shows, and actually that left a real lasting imprint of not being valued, not being worthy, compared to someone who have what we would naturally describe as a really extreme trauma, like physical abuse or sexual abuse. But actually, the output for both of these people can be the same, is that they create avoidance strategies or they change their behavior to try and influence other people's behavior from a place of fear or a place of wanting to be loved. So when when we talk about emotional regulation, if you are on the healthy spectrum, you understand that sometimes you get angry. You understand that sometimes you get sad. You understand that you have a whole range of emotions. And actually, there's a Disney film. I think it's brought a second one out. I think it's called Inside Out. Is that the one where they have all the different? That is. I haven't seen the second one yet, but apparently it's an amazing representation of some of the changes that you go through as a teenager. And and again, as teenagers, we are supposed to learn, or as children, as teenagers, we're supposed to learn how to manage our emotions. But actually, if we don't have good role models or we don't have positive environments to learn from, we don't learn to manage them. And then that becomes anger issues, that becomes anxiety, that becomes depression, that becomes isolation in many cases. So, emotional regulation is really owning the fact that we are not robots. And it's okay to be angry sometimes, and it's okay to be sad. But how do we how do we embrace that in a positive way? And it can be really hard because for the first 7 years of your life as a child, you are a sponge. Uh, and a lot of our behaviors are formed in those first 7 years. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people's trauma, and again, as we said, big or small, it doesn't matter, it's formed in those first 7 years. And so, if at a very young age, you get the idea that you have to behave in a certain way to get love, that's going to be with you for a while. And that will result in sometimes, extreme behavior, like what we'd call attention seeking behavior. Or if you've learned that actually, if you say something, you could get hit, well, that results in a behavior which causes you to be quiet and withdrawn and then internalize things, which is also not healthy, and it builds up inside. And that's when again you get the depression, the anxiety, some cases suicide attempts, because and it's all linked back to understanding what you're feeling and how to deal with what you're feeling when you feel it, and the fact that it's okay to feel it. I feel like I've just dumped a lot on there. Did that make sense?
I think that you put it in a very clear way, something what it takes years to realize that it's all coming to feeling our feelings,
Mm.
and how not each of us learns in childhood that it is safe to feel your feelings, and but then with the neuroplasticity, we know you can learn that at any age.
We can. I mean, that's a really good point you make, because we should never compare our journeys to anyone else's journeys.
Mm,
You come to these things when you're ready. Now, in what I want for everybody is that they don't sit in pain for a long period of time. We can't avoid pain in the world, unfortunately, not yet anyway. There's the a family member being sick, that causes pain. Um, Stress of a job, that causes pain. But we shouldn't have to sit in it for a long time and live with that pain. We should be able to get to a point where we can accept that it's difficult, accept that it's hard, and know that it's okay to be upset, to be afraid, to not have all the answers. And that part of that goes back to resilience, of course, and understanding that pain is only temporary. And I go through this now. On the other side, there is a better me, or I like to say more me, because it's not that we do change, but I think the changes are more to getting us into who we really are, getting through all the layers of the behavioral things that we've learned as children, or society has taught us, or the environment we work in has taught us. And I think the wonderful thing about getting older is finding that it's okay really to be you. But if you're stuck holding the anger, not knowing what to do with it, if you're stuck holding the despair, you're not you're not being you. You're being that emotion, and it's stopping you from embracing the world around you. And I don't want anyone to have to do that. But emotional regulation is often harder than people think, because we don't have the good foundations in childhood. And again, mindfulness, honestly, I used to think mindfulness was totally made up, and now I'm telling everyone to do it all the time. Mindfulness is another way of getting through that emotional regulation, is again sitting in yourself, acknowledging the pain, acknowledging the feelings, and then going, okay, so what? Here's something positive. Here's a gratitude exercise. Um, we can again, it's never too late to learn. You just have to do it when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And would you like to share a little bit about any case of or tools on how to process trauma or like past traumas which keep coming through triggers?
Yeah, so that's a really good question again. So it depends on the kind of trauma that you're dealing with. So we have what we call simple and complex. And in any case of trauma, it's really important to find the right toolkit for you as an individual. So my approach to trauma, I do a lot of clinical hypnotherapy. I do some NLP, um, some cognitive behavioral therapy as well. And these can solve a lot of those problems. However, one therapy that I'm not trained in it's on my list. It's called I get the letters wrong every time, EDMR or ERDM. I always get the letters in the wrong way order, but that is a really effective. It's eye rapid movement therapy, and it was developed by psychology that realizes that actually when we the way we blink process it helps us to process data essentially. And she created this therapy which helps basically to very quickly process that trauma. Um, so for some people with complex PTSD, for example, I'd always say if the lighter toolkits aren't working, so the clinical therapy, the NLP, the CBT, psychotherapy, if that doesn't work, I would always point them to one of my colleagues who does EMDR because that really is effective. But I mean, it doesn't have to be complex to go to use that therapy, but it's a really, really good toolkit. However, taking a step back before you get to sort of the therapy side of things is what can you do for yourself? Again, the first thing is to acknowledge that you are going through this trauma, that you are reliving it. Because we as humans think that we are the worst people in the world. We assume that our sins are the worst sins, and we carry these things with us. And with trauma, particularly when it's being caused by someone else or something else, but more so than someone else, there's often that feeling of it's somehow your fault, and so you can't talk about it because somehow you allowed it to happen, and therefore you shouldn't tell anybody because it was your fault. And that is complete and utter BS, obviously. And but it's still very scary. And we talked about courage at the start of this. There's no denying it takes so much courage to sit back and go, something happened to me. I am not okay, and I don't know how to be okay. But even doing that is like huge for so many people. It really is, and it takes a lot of bravery. But that is the first step where you kind of can go, okay, yeah, I I will be okay because I can tell someone that something happened. And of course, you don't even have to say what happened in the first instance. You can just go, a thing happened. I mean, again, in looking at veterans, multiple deaths of colleagues, mortaring all the time, being shot at. These are all multiple levels of trauma that build up, and some people get PTSD, some don't. Um, and and because of that, people with PTSD often go, "Oh, but they over there didn't get it, so I must be something wrong with me." But if I say there's something wrong with me, then like I will lose my job or I'll lose my position. We need to just get over the fact that suffering from trauma is bad. Like it's not a social evil. It is an experience that's happened to many different people in many different ways. And although it's not okay that it happened to you, it's okay that you have trauma as a result. And we can't change the past, but you do not have to sit in that pain. But the first thing you have to do is just admit to yourself and to someone who can help you that you are in that pain and then start moving forward.
You spoke beautifully about the acceptance and what would you say to somebody who struggle with accepting what it is and tends to criticize. And I know you mentioned some exercise they can do, but would you like to share or speak to that, when people prefer to live in denial, or like they know they might be something else, but they prefer to stay in that status quo of like, okay, I rather live in this place than have to see the truth, or quote unquote truth.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. So again, basically, when people struggle to accept themselves as they are, um, a lot of it stems from unmet psychological needs. So we all have basic human needs, and often it is around the need for autonomy, for competence. And when people feel like they don't meet certain standards, they then think that they can't be accepted in those areas, and then it gets that cycle again, and the amygdala kicks in, and we go to that dark place. So the again, from a brain point of view, we are wired to be negative. It is from our days when we were being hunted down by saber-toothed cats over in LA somewhere, probably. And, you know, the brain was there to go, this is a danger thing, don't do it, be aware, learn from it. We don't have the same kind of external fears now in the same way as we once did through our evolution. But we've evolved very quickly in the history of the world's evolution. Like humans have not been around that long in the grand scheme of things. And parts of our brain are actually still, you hear it called the reptilian brain. Like we're still stuck in that place, and that is that fear center. And so what you have to realize, first of all, is going to that place is a normal reaction. Again, it is that place of, if I go here, if I stay stuck where I am, I know this. And there's a point where pain becomes like a comfort blanket for people. It's what people know, it's familiar. And though it's horrible and though it's painful, it still provides a weird kind of comfort. And I remember when I first started training in clinical hypnotherapy, and I had a friend who has fear of spiders, and I was like, "Can I practice on you? Like, I can totally get rid of that phobia." And she was like, "No." And I said, "Why?" I said, I don't know what it'd be like to not have that fear. Like, I can't imagine a life without that fear. So I don't want to know a life without my fear." And that's a really tiny example, but that's how it is for a lot of people, because all they know is that pain, all they know is that fear. And that acceptance and starting from where you are, that is different. That is change. That is scary. And so when I don't take on clients unless they want to change, because you can't make someone change who doesn't want to, really. You have to allow yourself to go through a process. So that's a bit about the brain and why people get stuck in there. But so how can we solve that problem? And again, self-compassion, looking at those kind of dialogues again, looking at trying to find one good thing each day, and the gratitude practices again. All we're doing is rewiring the brain. And if you start journaling the good things, if you start journaling things that made you feel a little bit better, even if in a day you can only find one thing, and you write that down, next day you find one thing. Well, after 7 days, you've got 7 things, and your brain will start to see that pattern. The brain will start to go, oh, maybe it's okay to feel good about myself, or maybe there is a way of being nice to myself. So looking at self-compassion, of having those conversations, going, if if so and so did this thing, would I shout at them? Oh, I wouldn't. So why do I shout at myself? Or if my one of my employees made a mistake, I would help them, I'd mentor them, I would teach them why they were doing things wrong. So why am I being so hard on myself? If you can start to shift the narrative away from yourself from a moment and go, well, what would you do with somebody else's? Because nobody, okay, with very few exceptions, would we talk to other people the way we talk to ourselves sometimes. And it's realizing how cruel you are being to yourself, but you would never dream of doing that to another person, can help you to think, okay, maybe I can show compassion to myself. Then once you start showing compassion to yourself, eventually you start to accept where you are. And then you start to be able to move from where you are. But it all starts with acknowledging where you're at right now. And the other thing I want to say is people change for two reasons. They change to get away from pain and they change to go towards pleasure. Moving from pain is normally what gets you started in most cases. Remember that negative wiring. It's like it's too painful to endure anymore, so I am going to do something. But what keeps you going is moving towards pleasure and it's finding the thing that you want to be for. And so sometimes you have to start from the place of pain going, it is just too painful. I don't want it to be anymore. Take weight loss as an easy example. We get to the point where we just don't weigh the right amount. So we start to move because we want to be a different weight and it's too painful to be the weight we are. Often at some point in that journey, though, we start to go, I'm enjoying this. I'm going to run a marathon. I'm going to enter a competition. I'm going to take up a sport. And you're going now from the pain point of, I don't like how I look or how much I weigh, to, I like how I feel when I do these things. So it's from the pain to the pleasure. And it's the same when you're stuck in the trauma, when you're stuck in not accepting yourself. You might start off with, I just don't want to feel this way anymore. And eventually you go, and I want to help other people, could be the driver, or I want to change my job. And you've gone from the pain to the pleasure again. But if you don't have both ends, and you don't see both ends at the same time, obviously, or you don't often see it at the same time. If you only have pain, then sometimes you only shift the needle enough to reduce the pain a little, but not enough to get completely out. Which is why finding the thing that makes you want to really change is the difference. And it could be that new job, it could be a new partner, a new adventure. But it's starting with where am I now? And it's okay to be where I am now, but I don't want to stay here. And I don't have to stay here, and no one has to stay there.
Mm. I love what you said around readiness of people to change, which really helps them um, to realize. Sorry, I have my friend 95 years old is with me here.
Well, I did invent a shock absorber for a motorcycle.
He's telling me about how he invented shock
I
absorber.
borrowed the bike.
He actually did.
And then I readjusted everything.
I know, I'm not.
I won races.
Yeah, I'm today with a friend who's 95 years old. Okay, Johnny, that's good. And well, anyways, he just came here listening, and something came to him. But and that's the thing, that there are things we can control in life, and the things we can control, they just come to us, and it's up to us how we are going to react. And maybe it is part of learning to feel all of the emotions and being okay with feeling fear and feeling whatever it is, what we labeled as a negative, positive, which can help us to, like you mentioned, with compassion, to move to what's next. I would like to ask you actually, would you like to share a case of yours, of any of your clients who came to you and just surprised you in a way?
Oh, I mean, anyone who's worked in therapy will tell you that the problem is never the problem. And so whenever someone comes to me, they'll come with a statement of, I have a problem because XYZ. And so I had a lady come to me for insomnia. And her statement was, I have insomnia because of the menopause. And so we got in first session, we talked about obviously her sleep habits, her sleep hygiene, because here's actually a top tip for anybody. You cure sleep, your sleep patterns, and you will cure like 80% of your problems straight away. Like good sleep is so important to everybody from a mental, physical, spiritual point of view, we all need to have a lot of sleep. So insomnia is horrible, right? Because you're not getting recharged, you're not getting what you needed. But after a bit of digging, so session 2, we did some more digging, and essentially we got to the point where we realized that she'd never had good sleep, and she was in her 60s. She'd always woken up for like a couple hours a night, had to get up, could never get back to sleep. And basically, it came out that she was abused as a child in her bedroom. And so the reason she couldn't sleep was because actually she had never been safe in her bedroom. And she'd never acknowledged that before. For whatever reason, the pain of not sleeping was just, when she came to me, was too much. Like she had that pain. She couldn't sleep. She wanted to move forward. But because we got to the root quite quickly, we then could work on things that made her more positive. And we shifted it from the pain of not sleeping. Well, then we got her to sleep, which is brilliant. And then we got her to go, well, what is it you want to do? Like, what is it that you've been blocked from doing? And turned out she had a book that she wanted to write that she'd never been able to write because she couldn't get the headspace for it because poor woman wasn't sleeping. And she wrote the book. And it didn't take a long time, but what surprises me is that when you're ready to change, you can get to the root really quickly if you are open, if you accept it. And for whatever reason, and this is really important when you choose a therapist, is it has to be someone that you trust. It has to be what we call a therapeutic alliance. It's not to say that every therapist isn't equally qualified and all the rest of it. But it's about your comfort with that person to guide you on that journey. And I had another lady who came to me for a phobia. She had a fear of heights, and she so bad she couldn't even go up a hill. Her legs would get wobbly. She would have a physiological reaction to it. But she actually came to me, and it turned out that she'd been to another therapist and had a panic attack under hypnotherapy with them. And so not only did I have to build her trust, but I had to regain the trust of the profession, really, because she was desperate to not have this phobia, but the first therapist hadn't been right for her. And that's why, but going back to your first question of people who surprise me, people surprise me all the time in a good way. I think we often underestimate our own abilities, and we often sell ourselves short. And the reason people surprise me all the time is because I'm just blown away by how amazing people actually are. Genuinely, people have overcome from so many things, and to come to me and to go, I want to change. That is amazing. And when you hear some of the things, I've had military people, I've had refugees, I've had sexual abuse cases. I had a phone call from a friend who said, I've got someone who's right now wanting to commit suicide, and I had to get on the phone with them. And the fact is, to trust me or anybody with these things, that is an amazing privilege. And that takes an amazing amount of trust. But the reason people amaze me is because we as humans can overcome so much. We just need the right tools sometimes. And from my point of view, all I'm doing is giving them the right tools for what they need for where they're at. But they're doing the work. Every single one of them is doing the work. And it only works because they're doing the work and because they have chosen to change. And I had a lady who came to me and said, I'm overwhelmed and stressed and everything else. And I always say, how you make the commitment. And I asked for a 3-month commitment because that's the minimum I think you need to really make a change. I was like, how are you going to make time for this? All the rest of it. And she just didn't make the time. So I fired her as a client because I said, you're not committed to the change. I can't help you. This isn't going to work. So when people want to change, when people want to achieve something, what they can do is honestly limitless when they put their mind to it. And that's what amazes me about all my clients, is they go from some dark places to these wonderful, wonderful people full of light and opportunity again. And that is a real great privilege for me as well.
Would you like to, Philip, share with our audience a little about what was the biggest challenge for you in all the journey you have been going through? And you spoke about the car accident and how you had to learn to walk again. And I can't imagine really how it is, but that really made me think about, wow, would you like to add anything? And also, yeah.
I mean, that was pretty big, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, would you like to add, how did you learn to live again after, you woke up in that hospital? I don't know if it's okay to talk about it. That's
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, it doesn't bother me. I mean, it's 20 years ago now. So
like I can imagine, you wake up and it's a new country, new language, no family, and it's like you don't remember even maybe what happened because of the, accident. And
so I was 21 when it happened. So I just turned 21, and I'd lived in Russia at that point for about 6 months. I'd spent four months in a place called Krasnoyarsk, and I'd moved to St. Petersburg in the January, February. So when it happened, so the first thing I remember when I woke up was hearing a groan. And I was like, who's that groaning? And I realized it was me groaning. Turns out you do that. Who knew? And I was lying on a gurney, and I just remember going, and all I knew was I was in Russia. So I had to speak Russian. That's all I knew. And obviously I was studying in Russian, so that was cool. But to be honest, I think in all these situations, and it's the same with like being bombed in Afghanistan, or yeah, actually, I've had loads of random experiences, which is probably why I'm quite so resilient. But in each situation I've had, it comes when it's really, really extreme. You break it down to one step at a time. So with the car accident, the first thing was, where am I? And I asked them, paramedic, where am I? You're in hospital. What happened? You got hit by a car. The next thing the last thing I remembered, I'd lost about half a day of memory. So I remembered we'd been out in St. Petersburg, we'd been to the cinema with some friends. It was a Saturday, it was a lovely day. And the last thing I remember was being with all those people going, where are my friends? Like, are they okay? And they're like, no, you're fine. It was just you. And my friend Kat also got clipped as well, but she wasn't hit as badly as I was. So I was like, okay, cool. And then the next thing I remember going is, where's my shoe? And my trainer had fallen off at some point in this process. I had one trainer on and one trainer off. And so the point is really, the brain in those extreme situations, the brain kind of just takes over with one thing at a time that you need to focus on. And so literally, because I was in so much pain, and I couldn't move, and I'd lost my coordination, and it was everything was a bit fuzzy. You just take it one step at a time. And that's the secret to everything. You take one step at a time. So also while I was living in Russia, I decided to go to Ukraine. Obviously this is 20 years ago now, very different time. And I thought I'd get the train from Kiev to St. Petersburg. And I didn't realize that there were two train lines. One went via Minsk in Belarus, and one went via Moscow. And I thought it was on the Moscow train. I got to the Russian border. It wasn't Russia, it was Belarus, and I got arrested because I didn't have a visa. And this is also before we had like mobile phones, and I used to buy a phone card and ring my parents, every couple of weeks and all the rest of it. Again, the brain just takes over and goes, okay, well, I haven't done anything wrong intentionally, so I've got to trust in that. And I was also very naive for 21-year-old at the time, probably. But I did speak Russian, and I had a visa for Ukraine. I had a visa for Russia. So I just kept explaining for 4 hours what had happened. And eventually they let me go back to Ukraine. And then from Ukraine, I made a different way into Russia. And it was a bit stressful, and I may have cried a little bit. But I did cry a little bit at various points, because actually even going back wasn't straightforward. There was no direct train back to Kiev. So I had to go via a bunch of different places. I had no ticket to go to different places. I had no money to go to different places. And I got by purely on the goodwill of the people around me. And it was the same with the car in Russia, that when I woke up the next day, people who'd seen the accident, who didn't know me, came to the hospital to see if I was alive. And they brought me vodka. Of course, they brought me vodka. They brought me grapes, and they brought me red caviar because that's good for the blood, and all those kind of things. And the same in Afghanistan. I remember we were being bombed. We were living in tents. The chance of being hit was pretty slim, but if we did get hit, it probably wasn't going to be a good outcome. Put our body armor on, sit there, put a DVD on, watch the film, you know, what else can you do? You just take one step at a time. And you don't, I'm not advocating people going to extreme situations to test their resilience, but in anything, you know, don't eat the elephant just whole, just do it bit by bit. And that's the same with all these things. To build resilience, to take over, that's all I've done, is taking it one step at a time. It's been my situation that I've had a lot of situations to test that approach, but I still have bad moments. I had about a 6-week period during COVID where I got depressed, because I was still working, I was still doing other bits and bobs, and it was really hard. There was a lot of uncertainty, and I was just really tired, to be honest. And for 6 weeks, I still kept doing my work, but I was not functioning at my best. And then I woke up and I was okay the next day. I mean, that's lucky for me, but I had to allow myself to go through that mourning process, because also, you know, COVID, I live in a forest, so COVID for me actually was fairly pleasant. I live in a forest, I have a dog, we could go out every day. Outside is really important. My sister lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in China during COVID. She did not have a good COVID experience. But despite all those things, I'm still human, and I still have moments where I need to recharge. And what I've learned is that I have to do better at listening to myself to do that. But in those situations, one step at a time. But after the situation, give myself time to recover, give myself time to process, give myself time to cry, to laugh, to do something silly, to get that emotional regulation back in place. And it's the same for anybody, is one step at a time. But after the event, take a step back and go, wow, look what I've done, look what I've been through. I did that. Actually, I might need to cry about it now because danger is over, or I just might need a holiday to process, just to be still. But ultimately, be kind to yourself, because we're not perfect, and we all have breaking points, no matter who we are.
Well, I feel like you could, write multiple books. There will be story after story after story, and you're such a great storyteller, and you live in so many places, and you also work across different cultures, like Australia, Hawaii, Canada, UK. How do you see the cultural factor of like how we may deal with emotions or situations in different ways? Is there any cultural thing as you observe?
Definitely. I mean, I find that Americans are way more open to everything. Definitely. I say that with love. But actually,
yeah, right. It's like, yeah. I mean, at least it looks like on the outside.
well, I was going to say it is, but actually, I'm probably being unfairly generalizing there. I think cultures talk about things in different ways. So obviously, I'm British. My childhood, 80s, 90s, you didn't. I was never say I was taught to be seen and not heard. My parents were those kind of parents, but there was a vibe of that. So you learn to be quiet and smile sweetly in some cases. I know, for example, in Russia, when I lived there, people don't smile on the street as much as they do in the UK, and we don't smile a whole lot either, in fairness. But it's more close. But inside someone's house, when you're in their personal place, they are as welcoming and friendly as anybody else. So my experience is that people are people. We all have the full range of emotions that everyone else has. But culturally, how we show that is very different. And so it's understanding those nuances, and understanding that just because someone isn't laughing at my joke doesn't mean that it's not funny to them, but they don't express it in the same way. And it's also understanding that I don't like saying normal, but my spectrum of average, say, of the average behavior of the average person is totally, well, it's a whole the thing we can dive into here. A lot of the scientific data around average and normal behavior is actually based on men, because they are a really easy subset to do data against because their hormones are regular or the rest of it. And I apply, and the reason I bring that up is because when you start doing tests on women, we're seen as outliers because we have hormones. They behave in a different way, and that's why a lot of stuff wasn't historically tested on women. That's changing now. The same thing applies when we look at psychology of people, in that a lot of Western psychology is based on Western behavior. And so that becomes the normal of what we expect to see. But if you have grown up in a society such as the Soviet Union, where there was a lot of mistrust, you had the secret police in different forms, it creates a certain way of behaving. And so you have to get through those cultural layers first to get to the root of the problem. And how long it takes to get to those cultural layers depends on the therapeutic alliance, your ability to listen, to be patient, but also to not project your expectation of how you behave on somebody else. And that is both cultural, but it's also an individual thing as well, in that I say I want 3 months for my clients. That's generally speaking a good period to get to make a lot of changes. There will be outliers who that doesn't work for. There will be people who, like, I might start off with 1 session a week. There's people I need to have 2 sessions a week with. It's all those kind of things. So the real big advice I have in those things is just meet people where they are. Try not to have expectations of how people should or couldn't behave, because that's also what causes us to get screwed up, right? Is because we think society thinks we should behave in a certain way. And actually, this person's an introvert and just doesn't want to come out to all the parties all the time. But this person is an extrovert, but also doesn't like parties. Like, we just need to allow people to be themselves. Accept that there are cultural differences in sort of how we perceive these things, but on a scale of emotion, we all, regardless of culture, have them all. It's just how much of each one we show, and when and in what situations we're comfortable showing them.
Well, thank you. You are such a deep thinker and have so much insights and reflections. I love that. Is there anything else I didn't ask you and you feel like you would like to share? I know we spoke so much, and I also want to leave some space in case if there's anything before I get to how people can connect with you and work with you and listen to your podcast.
No, I think just as you have held space for me to talk, I think we all need to hold space for other people to share as well when they're ready. And that's the really biggest thing, is just let people find their own way, give them the space to be themselves. And for some people you need a lot of space, for some you need less, but just try not to place your own expectations on someone else because they're going through their own stuff. And also just don't compare yourself to other people, because our journeys are the same, but they're also different. And we do things at the time that we're ready to do these things. And so really the only thing we can control is ourselves. We can't control anything else, just ourselves. So work on ourselves, and then other people get easier.
Yes, I mean, I love that idea of releasing the judgment and expectation toward ourselves, and then even with healing, in my own healing, like it's like, and listening to other survivors of like when the healing is going to be done, like how, like why am I getting, still emotional or like imbalance, or one days are easier and other days are really hard. And you spoke about having those 2 weeks during 6 weeks in the COVID. So, and it's almost like the whole judgment of like, this is bad, I shouldn't feel this way, makes it like that labeling doesn't help, right? Versus just being with those feelings, and which when you never learn to feel, it feels unsafe. It feels like there's going to be punishment if I express. So, but yes, you don't have to do it alone. So if you want, you can work with Philippa Bagley. And so Philippa, how people can connect with you, work with you, tell us a little bit. And I'm going to add all those links below as well.
Thank you. No, so you can find me on all the normal social medias, Philippa Bagley. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Also, you can go to my website, philippabagley.com, keeping it easy. And I mean, just reach out for a chat at any point. Not even, you don't have to be a client, but I love talking to people. And yes, I have my podcast as well, Journey to Purpose, where I interview people about their journeys. My belief with that really is that essentially everyone has a story, and not everyone needs me. But if I can connect more people, if I can have more conversations with people who have different journeys, then they might hear someone else's story and go, that's the person I need. So yeah, find the podcast Journey to Purpose. But Philippa Bagley on all the social medias, you will find me.
And what's the podcast name?
Journey to Purpose.
Journey to Purpose, right? Okay. Journey to Purpose. Thank you, everyone. Philippa Bagley. Thank you, Philippa. It was our first time, and I hope not the last. You guys make sure to check the links below, and you all have a wonderful day, night, wherever you are in the world. Thank you, Philippa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.